Hey, now that I have your attention, Happy New Year, first of all. I really want to thank each and every one of you for listening to this podcast. I don't know who's listening, but if you are listening, I really appreciate you. I have a lot to talk about in this 10-episode series, and I'm gonna call it branding, just branding. Why is branding so important? Why do I keep talking about branding? Why is branding a topic of discussion in the first place? This is why. Branding is a whole representation of yourself, what you represent, and what people think of you. So it's a three-way, I'm trying to look for the right word for you guys. It's a three-way component that triggers anybody or anything that knows or sees something about a product that they've seen before. And chances are, if you've not seen this brand before, the chances of you getting into that brand or being involved with that brand is slim. Let me give you a very, 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 very simple case study example. If you know somebody that has been your friend for, God knows, 5 years, and you guys are cool, if you hear that person's voice or if you talk to them at any length, you can recognize that voice, right? So when you recognize that voice, it means that you understand what that person is saying or talking about or who they are or what they are. That gives that person a branding exposure. Even though you know that person's name or you know what they do, you still know that person because you are knowledgeable about the fact that they exist. Same thing goes with a brand. It's very simple. You know Coca-Cola exists. You know Nike exists. You know Delta exists. You know AMC exists. Like, you know words, even though they sound like acronyms or they sound like names that don't sound like English, you know what they mean because you associate yourself with that brand. So that's what branding is about. I'm just giving you like a little breakdown to just narrow down before I go into the meat of the discussion. So a brand is a representation of what you know, who you know, and what people know about you. And the only way to keep that consistent is for you to be consistent. Because imagine if Coca-Cola decided to take out one of the L's, Coca-Cola, or take one of the O's out. Or that, it doesn't sound, even I didn't even sound right saying that because it doesn't make any sense. Because you know what it stands for and you know what it means, and you don't put Coke and Coca-Cola in the same bucket because you know that those are two different entities. So the same thing goes for branding. How do you brand yourself? What do you do with yourself? How do you control your space? How do you control your branding surface? This is what you got to know. The first thing for branding is a logo. And when I say a logo, logos is a Greek word, and that means to know. It's like the word logo itself is not just a word, it's a whole being. So when you see a logo, when you know about a logo or when you know about something, that gives you a sort of confidence or comfortability about that thing. So when you make logos, when you make representations about things, you're telling yourself that this is who I want to show the world. And if you want to show the world in a negative light, fine, go ahead. If you want to show it in a positive light, fine, go ahead. At the end of the day, whatever you give out is what you get in. The same way they say you are what you eat, that's what your brand is. So you need to have a logo that stands out. There's something called psychology of color. There's a reason why Nike is black, and there's a reason why Coca-Cola is red. They're not just those colors because of anything. Let me give you a little quick breakdown. If you have a red logo, that just tells somebody that you are in for like emergency, or you're into something that is fast, like fast food. Fast food is usually orange, but it plays between orange, yellow, and red. So you got to know where you stand in between that thread. If you're using black, it means that you're showing power. That's Adidas, that's Nike, that's Apple. You got to look at those colors and know what they stand for. If you're trying to get a green logo, are you going into farming? Are you going into non-governmental organizational kind of stuff. Like, what is your purpose? So you have to know what you're doing. Are you building trees? You got to understand where you stand, because if you don't stand on a platform that represents who you actually are, chances are people are not going to translate that. And the worst thing is for you to start something and nobody knows what you're talking about. That's the worst thing. So while I'm talking about branding 101, or on this episode, know your brand or understand who you are as a brand, is because before I go into the meat and the nitty gritties of a brand, you have to understand that whoever you work for, whatever you do with your time, whoever you are, all those decisions matter based on who you represent or who you show forth. So it's beyond, oh, I got a brand name, oh, my logo looks fancy. It's about the work behind that logo. If I give you a shirt today and that shirt has no Supreme on it, you're probably not going to wear it. But if it does have one on it, you're probably going to wear it. Why? Because you want to associate yourself with somebody that is well established. That's the same way somebody should establish themselves with you. It's that simple. It's that simple. It's literally that simple. So I'm going to break it down and I'm going to tell you some other things you need to know. How to brand yourself. There are 6 categories of branding. 6. There might be more, but 6 is the actual standard. And I'm going to go down each and every one of them so you understand what I'm talking about. And then I'll explain it further so that you don't just think, oh, branding is branding. The first branding is product branding. When you do product branding, a product is anything that you can sell or anything that you can use as a tangible exchange for something, right? So if you're doing product branding, you have to think about the package, you have to think about the presentation, you have to think about your why. You have to think about, why are you doing this? Who is it going to benefit? Who is the beneficiary? Those are the questions you got to ask yourself before you get into anything. Because if you don't answer those questions, then your mission and your vision are simply non-existent, So every product has their own base, and you have to know what your base is. That's number 1. So I will go right into it and talk about product branding. Product branding has a lot of perks that deal with the size, the representation of what that thing is. And when you know what the product is, you know what you're buying. Simple. There's another thing. Number two. I'll say number 2 is personal branding. Personal branding is where you really show yourself. Personal branding is more like, this is who I am. And I've been talking about this all day. Personal branding is, who do you know? How do you know this person? What have they told you that they believe in, that you also believe in, to get the next thing that is from them? Is it knowledge? Is it money? Is it power? Is it understanding? All those things have branding etiquette to it. So you got to know what personal brand you represent for yourself. The third one is corporate branding. Corporate branding, we all know these big companies, when all these big companies come together, there's always something that makes them stand out. So you have to know what makes yourself stand out. If you're doing corporate branding, is it how you work with your team? Is it how you work with your staff? Is it how you work with yourself? There's a lot of things that you have to factor in for corporate branding, so that when somebody sees you as a brand, they can line up that personal brand, that product brand, to that corporate brand. Because if your corporate brand is trash, chances are no one's going to get anything from you. And that's the truth. Geographical branding is another thing. And I think geographical branding is fun because you only brand yourself in a certain location to suit the need of the people that are in that specific location. Why? Because you have to understand that there are 2 kinds of marketing. There's demographic marketing and there's psychographic marketing. So the geography of the location of where your brand is or where it's being exposed to has a big role to play. I'll give you an example. When I did my branding in fashion, specifically fashion in Nairobi, Kenya, That's when I first started doing this t-shirt line stuff. And I started doing it back in 2014, about 6 years ago. And I was just doing my own thing. You know, I was enjoying myself. I was doing it for fun. But eventually I was like, people are actually buying this stuff because the logo and the writing actually makes sense. So my message was, I'm a fine African. And I did that because I was trying to send a message about the culture. So I did that, I'm a fine African in Nairobi. Not that I was trying to do it to show that I'm African and everybody else is not, but because I wanted to show people that what I do is culturally influenced, and there's a reason for, there's a value, there's an upcharge. And those are the things that people don't realize, because if I did I'm a fine African in America, trust me, nobody's gonna buy that shit. Down pack, period. Because you're gonna look at it like, why are you talking about being a fine African and you're all the way in America? But this is the problem. I can still represent myself as an African based on my personal branding, like I mentioned, but my geographical branding may not be successful because I'm not in the right place for the right thing, which is what I'm trying to do. So if you're trying to do something like that, you have to put yourself in a location that people understand the lingo. And that lingo is very important because you may think everybody understands it, but it's just you. So you have to be very specific. That's why you've never seen me wear anything like that out here. I'm an African, I'm proud, but I know that it's not the right location to service or do a product like that because the market is not there. So if I need to expatiate on that, then I would probably need to do something more than just saying I'm a fine African, if that makes sense. So geographically, you have to treat the needs of the people, you have to meet the needs of the people, and you have to be consistent with it. Another one is called retail branding. Retail branding is more like product branding, but that's where you actually put the value and you now decide that, okay, this is what I want to sell, this is how I want to sell it, this is where I want to sell it, and this is the price I want to sell it. And that price you put has to match with the place you are. You can't cut your coat according to your size and then leave that coat and then run to another place to try and fit it. It's not going to work. You need to be systematic with how you brand yourself, so when you put that brand out there and people are seeing that it's retail, you know that you're giving somebody a value that they cannot get anywhere else. And that's very important. The last one is co-branding. Co-branding is very important, and I'm gonna say this is an Instagram tip. If you have any business that is branded out, and let's say you have two accounts, right? For example, like I have two accounts. I have my business account and I have my personal one. So if I want to collaborate with my brand, or if you want to collaborate with another brand that's entirely away from your brand, but you guys have the same relative influence, you know, there's co-branding, there's merging, and you can mix oil and water, but there are brands that can collaborate together that can clash. You have to do that kind of research to know exactly what that is. But co-branding, like I said on Instagram, is where you can be able to, you know, they call it tag promotion, co-branding promotion. So what you do is, if you want to tag your business partner, you can do that in the settings on Instagram, but I think you have to have a business account or a creator account. I don't know if you can do it with a personal account. But if you're trying to brand yourself in a way that shows people that, hey, I'm working with somebody that relates to what I do, you have to set yourself out. You have to use colors that are expatiating your brand. You have to use things that just do not look like they're cooked, you know, under a minute. So you have to co-brand with people that meet your needs. And this is something that I've noticed on Instagram that people do. If you are an influencer and you have 1 million followers, but my audience is completely different from yours, your 1 million followers are not going to help me because it doesn't meet the need of that particular brand. So numbers are good, but you have to be more specific on how you treat those numbers. And that's why co-branding is important, because if I'm co-branding with you, it means that I'm joining my head with your head and I'm getting a bigger head, because we know that there's plenty room for growth. But if I'm trying to join mine with yours and we're not meeting in the middle, then we're both wasting each other's time. So you have to know what brands complement, and the keyword is complement. You have to look for brands that complement what you do, and that way you can be able to grow geographically, personally, retail wise. You can do the whole 9 yards, but you have to first understand your why. So this is something I'll tell you before I close, before we go into the next episode. Try and write down at least 5 things you want to do for your brand every day. You can start with yourself. You can say, I want to eat better. I want to go to the gym, whatever it is. Put it down, have 5 listed down every day, and make at least 3 out of those 5 decisions 100% completed by the end of the day. If you can do 5 of them, perfect. But make sure that those 3 or those 5 complement your next day, because what you do the day after matters, and the day before also matters. So just make sure that your brand stands out. I can't explain for everybody what their brand does, but what I do know is that if I see a brand and I don't know that brand, but that brand speaks to me in volumes without having to talk, then I know that they did their work, they did their job. But if I see a brand that's just looking all flabbergasted, I'm not gonna be there for too long, because I know that it's flabbergasting. It's just flabby. It's not my thing, because it's not associating with my need. And at the end of the day, when you know your why, you know how you're gonna treat the people who know why they're buying those things. So you have to be very intentional with your products. You have to be very intentional with how you treat people. You have to be very intentional how you help people, because even in a workplace, when you're doing corporate branding, you need to show that the values, the etiquette, the literal things that are down there packed for you is what you represent. Every company has core values, mission statements, and vision statements. Those are not just words. Those are actual brands that represent that company. If they take out 1 or 2 of those things, it can change the whole paradigm shift of that company. So you have to make sure that whatever you're doing with your brand, starting with yourself, makes sense. Tell yourself why you're doing it, and then do it. And then when you can do it perfectly, you can do it consistently. And when you do it consistently, you will see the reward for it. Nothing was built in a day, not even Rome. So I would suggest today, pick 3 things you want to do. Decide on them. You can stretch them to 5, but make sure that you can do at least 3 things every day. That's what the millionaires do. That's what the entrepreneurs do. And I'm not calling myself a millionaire right now because I don't have it, but I know I'm going to be a millionaire or a billionaire or even a trillionaire, because I know that this that I'm doing right now, you guys are going to hear this 10 years from now. This is 2020, and you're going to be like, oh, he said this, he said that. I'm going to listen to myself and I'm like, yeah, I said that. And I'm not going to back down from what I said, because it's consistent. So I'm just putting out a challenge to you all to learn your brand, know what you guys want to do with your lives, know what you want to do with your business, know what you want to do with your future. Everybody's like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and do a 9 to 5, and then I'm going to do something else after that. I'm going to save money. That's a good thing to do. It's a very straightforward thing to do. But my thing is, those things that you're doing, why are you doing them? Are you doing it to get a bigger house? Are you doing it to get flexed up? Are you doing it for clout? Like, why are you doing it? So I would say this to close. Your branding is very important, because your name, the size, the logo, how you look, what you say, how you say it, all those things matter. So by the time you figure out what your why is, you definitely know how you're going to model that design to fit into the frame for your brand. I have not talked about anything specific as far as details, which I will in the next episode. I'm going to give you some apps that you can be able to use, some websites you can be able to use. You can ask me some questions. We can do that on Instagram. We can do that through Anchor. But at the end of the day, I want to see you guys grow. I'm growing too. And I believe that being the first episode of the year, I want to show you that this is the standard that I want to set for myself. And after this 10 episode series, there's going to be another episode series coming, and it's just going to keep getting better. So for now, understand your brand, think about what you want to do for yourself, and do it. And then when you do it successfully. That's all I gotta say for today. And I've been your host, Flav Beats. Real name, Favor Obasi Ike. You can check me out on Instagram, FLAEVBEATZ, or just Google me, baby. I'm everywhere, from TikTok to LinkedIn. You can check all this stuff out. I'm gonna transcribe it for you, and you can check it on the Play website. You can go to playinc.online, which is PLAYINC.online, or you just check out my article on LinkedIn and you can get the same information. So with no further ado, it's been your host, Flav Beats, and thank you for listening to the We Don't Play podcast channel, and see you in episode 2. Bye-bye.